Well, if you're a history buff like me, Williamsburg, Virginia is the place to be. I wanted to compare it to Philadelphia, which I'm so familiar with regard to early American history. When I got to Williamsburg, one of the first stops I made was in colonial Williamsburg, where I saw sheep. And then I saw the sheep were in a little pasture next to this nondescript little farmhouse. I took a walk around to the front of the farmhouse and was very surprised to see that it was America's first Black Baptist church. So needless to say, I had to go inside and see what the heck was going on in there, and it was a really cute small exhibit showing some of the history of the first Baptist church in America. One of the exhibits on the wall had a timeline. Of course, we're sitting in the 1856 building, the dedicated brick African American Baptist Church on Nassau Street in Williamsburg. But if you slide on back to what I was familiar with, in 1816, the African Methodist Episcopal Church was formed by Richard Allen in Philadelphia. So even that was mentioned. As I scanned around the room, some of the exhibits were pretty eye-catching. It was a very small room and only half of the building was open. But as you can see, I was the only one in there. It didn't require any tickets, and it was a really nice display. Unfortunately, the music that was playing and some of the speeches are very dim, so I couldn't bring them over on the microphone. But as you can see, it was a really nice exhibit. We love our stained glass windows, and in all the panes, well, in all the windows, they had a couple panes that had some very catchy little sayings. Here's a couple of them. Now, when I left the church, I just wanted to walk around colonial Williamsburg. I don't know, if you didn't go to church, maybe you ended up at the courthouse and the gallows, but that was a fun little spot that the kids enjoyed watching their dads. You can see that the colonial costumes, as well as the modern outfits, were in full bloom. But the big difference between colonial Williamsburg and Philadelphia is that Philadelphia's historic district is right there in the city of downtown bustling Philadelphia, where colonial Williamsburg has been preserved in, I'm sure, very much close to the style that it was in 200, 300, 400 years ago. It is absolutely quiet. I didn't put any music on the background because I wanted you to hear what I heard. Absolutely nothing. Birds chirping. That's an auction block, if anyone's ever seen one, or if you've never seen one, that's where our slaves were bought and sold, right there. I get a big kick out of the horse and carriages. Here's one of them here, just trotting along, coming up the street. Some of the interesting faces that I saw in town were the black faces, and it was great to see them representing what they represented back in colonial Williamsburg. But getting back to one of my favorite scenes are the Cadillacs of the day. Even in Philadelphia, I might be caught on one of those horse rides around town, and it's always fun when the driver says, "Where are you from?" And I'll say, "Chester." And then we just have a nice little chuckle. And I usually get an expanded tour when I do that. For those of you who don't know, as you scan around here, those little stairs that you see are what you would climb up on to get on top of a horse, because they are kind of tall. And if your horse is a little tired and needs a rest, what a perfect place to tie your horse up under a big old shade tree. Of course, the crafts are big. There's a shoe cobbler. There's a gentleman who says since the 1700s he's been doing horseshoes. And here's a guy who's actually making a carriage. Let's listen to him.
40s, and it's a reconstruction of one of the buildings that was owned by Elkanah Dean, the man who lived in the White House up in the corner. Dean was a Dublin-trained coachmaker and ran a business here from 1772 to 75. He employed a wheelwright, he employed a blacksmith, and several other specialists needed in the trade of carriage making.
The highlight of my week in Williamsburg was to see this reenactment of African American music as portrayed by this group, taking us all the way from slavery up to gospel music. Hey, there's my new cousin. Never met the man in my life, but when he realized I didn't have a ticket because the ticket office closed at 5:30 and the show started at 8:30, he let me in. There's Irving, our host, and as you can see, the only light there was those baskets of pine wood. It was pitch dark, almost frightening, but I'm sure it couldn't have been any more frightening for me than it was for the slaves. What a great, great vacation.